Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. could be our next president if elections were held now. That is the consistent result of recent surveys by SWS, Pahayag, and RP Mission. Everywhere he goes, he's met with a sea of red supporters. BBM! 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 The Kalye surveys, where ordinary Filipinos on the street are interviewed, indicate why there seems to be this groundswell of support for Marcos Jr. Supporters will say, when asked why they're leaning towards Bongbong,
subukan natin ulit.
Okay, naabutan niyo ba panahon ng tatay niya?
Yes, sir.
Kumusta po ang experience sa pamumuno niya?
Ay, maganda yung kay Marcos, mura bilihin ko nun.
Kanino po kayo?
BBM kami.
BBM. Bakit po si BBM?
Kasi siya na yung magbabago sa Pilipinas. BBM kami, basta BBM kami.
Nangako siya na lahat ibababa na presyo para matupad.
It's as if voters aren't fed up yet with the strongman rule of Duterte. They still don't trust the liberals to take over when he steps down. Perhaps what they're looking for is a younger version of him. This they may believe to have found in Bongbong Marcos.
I know that it is this manner of unifying leadership that can lead us through this crisis, get our people safely back to work, for all of us to begin to live our lives once again. And that is why I am today announcing my intention to run for the presidency of the Philippines in the upcoming May 2022 elections. I will bring that form of unifying leadership back to our country.
Ferdinand Edrelin Marcos Sr. was president of the Philippines from December 30, 1965 to February 25, 1986. He declared martial law in September of 1972, took on the powers of Congress while amending the Constitution to stay in office indefinitely. Without Congress to check his powers, Marcos was able to binge on foreign capital. Banks were awash with petrodollars from OPEC nations and happy to lend. The money was misdirected by Marcos to many unproductive projects and mismanaged government corporations and monopolies run by his cronies, who were acting as his dummies. But to deal with the inflation caused by the oil shock of the 1970s, interest rates rose in the ensuing years. Prior to the fall of Marcos in the mid-80s, inflation was running at over 60%. National debt had reached 100% of our gross national product, the highest it has ever been. We couldn't repay them, so the peso had to be unpegged to the US dollar and devalued. Our foreign reserves were not enough to cover 90 days' worth of imports. The economy, in other words, was on its knees. At a time when Band-Aid in the West was raising money for starving children in Africa, the Philippines had its own starving people on the once prosperous sugar island of Negros. BBM, who was a governor of Ilocos at the time, was filmed partying with his mates aboard a yacht, singing, BBM would like us to forget his ghastly record in office. He would instead want us to remember the painful restructuring of the economy by the EDSA regime following its collapse under the Marcoses. And it was a tumultuous period of transition, filled with coup attempts, natural disasters, and external economic shocks. By 2005, however, 20 years after EDSA, the Philippines had matched the 3.8% GDP average annual growth rate that Marcos had achieved throughout his 20-year rule. This was done while reducing its debt to GDP ratio. Not only that, GDP per capita growth in the 20 years after EDSA had outstripped that under Marcos by 52%, a remarkable achievement. But the reason why this isn't talked about as much is that social inequality remained high. The notion that rising tide lifts all boats wasn't observed. Not enough was invested by the state in its people through land reform, education, health, and housing programs, since meeting our national debt obligations and balancing the budget by raising taxes and selling off assets was the priority. Large disparities in income and wealth led to a greater diaspora. It also led to social unrest at home, criminality, and various forms of addiction. All this makes the electorate lose faith in government and become susceptible to populist messages. That's what propelled Joseph Estrada into Malacanang in 1998 and Rodrigo Duterte in 2016. And that's what gives BBM's claims credibility today. Sure, the macroeconomy may have improved under the EDSA regime, but opportunities for people down below haven't changed. Well, not much anyway. BBM has managed to tap into a deep reservoir of discontent with the post-EDSA establishment. His supporters have swallowed his message hook, line, and sinker. They fully believe he will lead us on a quest back to a glorious past prior to EDSA, where the streets are literally paved with Marcos gold.
Ito, akin. Ito ang gusto kong sana manalo.
Marcos,
Oo,
bakit yan? Bakit?
para may balik sa Pilipinas yung pira sa Amerika. Alam namin na daming pira to sa Amerika. Sobrang 100 bahay nila doon sa Amerika.
Populism is often based on a cult of personality. In this case, it's the cult of Ferdinand Marcos, the strongman. BBM taps into that cult in the way that he mimics his father's speeches. But another thing that populism does is it weaves a conspiracy theory that there are sinister plots hatched by an evil cabal against the chosen few. In this case, the evil plotters consist of dilawans and oligarchs in cahoots with drug lords and human rights lawyers. And they're seeking to prevent the rise of the Maharlikans and DDS, the only real Filipinos, quote unquote.
Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now, there's a 3 million drug addicts. There are. I'd be happy to slaughter them. At least, if Germany had Hitler, the Philippines would have, but, my victims, I would like to be all criminals to finish the problem of my country and save the next generation from perdition.
This is a populist trope, the othering of the opponent, demonizing them as subhuman, deserving of less respect, less protection, and less civility is vintage Marcos. BBM and his partner, Sara Duterte, are tapping into the wellspring of this populist folklore. But to address this populism, which captivates our electorate, another revolution in thinking is needed, one that takes us beyond the market fundamentalism of the post-EDSA regime. BBM would have us believe that the only way forward is to return to the past, to the rule of a strongman. The opposition wants us to stick to the existing path of puritanical market fundamentalism, which they've used as an antidote to Marcos. This is clearly a false choice. The Philippines indeed is at a crossroad. We either retrogress, stagnate, or progress. It's easy to fall back on old, familiar ways of being, or to persist in current practices for fear of the unknown. The more courageous thing to do would be to remain open to new and emergent ways of seeing and imagining the world. In that liminal space, we might just find the endless and inexhaustible horizon of possibilities that we previously closed our minds to. After turning to state-directed crony capitalism under Marcos and the economic rationalism post-EDSA, it's high time we adopt other ways of sense-making that would attune us to the real situation faced by our people and provide us with new modalities for solving our perennial problems.